Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about imagery. Um, Metaphors are a kind of imagery, and we have discussed metaphors, and I think we're getting better at writing about metaphors. But not all imagery is metaphorical, some of it is literal. To talk about imagery, the key is to remember that the purpose of using imagery is almost always for the sake of pathos. Usually, a writer is trying to elicit some sort of emotional response in her audience, and she knows exactly who her audience is, and so she can kind of pull at their emotional heartstrings, to use a very annoying cliche idiom, but she can kind of like recognize what is going to make them cry, make them joyous, make them angry, because she knows so much about that audience, and she can use imagery to elicit that effect. And so when you're talking about imagery, you want to look at details, lots and lots of details. The more in depth you can go with talking about the details and the purpose behind those details, the stronger your analysis will be. So I'm going to go way back to this Florence Kelley prompt that we looked at quite a long time ago. I had you do a soapstones activity on it, and then you were looking at the beginning, the middle, and the end. Now, many people recognized the imagery in this speech. A lot of you wrote about the imagery, but I think for almost everyone, you could have written more about the imagery, because you can look at the specific images being evoked and connect those to a more specific argument. So it's not just that talking about little girls is going to make the women in this audience feel sad. It's that there is some sort of very specific emotion being elicited by the word little and by the word girls that is going to be different than little boys or big old boys or whatever. So what you want to do when you are writing about imagery is find the details, not just sort of in general, but specifically. And that is why I keep telling you not to use the phrase paint a picture, because the writer here is not trying to paint a picture. That, first of all, that's an idiom, right? And literally the writer is not trying to paint a picture, but also this writer is not necessarily concerned with you picturing something in your head. She's not trying to like entertain you the same way a fiction writer would. Instead, she is trying to elicit an emotional response, right? So let's look at the first place where she says little girls, and think about the imagery evoked in that paragraph. Today, she says, tonight while we sleep, several thousand little girls will be working in textile mills all the night through, in the deafening noise of the spindles and the looms, spinning and weaving cotton and wool, silks and ribbons for us to buy. Now think about the way she could have said that. She could have said, kids have to work at textile mills in the middle of the night. That already has a lot of imagery, because you're talking about textile mills and the middle of the night. You might just say kids have to work more than they should. There you go. No imagery at all in that, right? But obviously that doesn't have the same kind of rhetorical thrust as what she has written here. So I just want to think about the term little girls and why this in particular is the image that she evokes throughout this whole piece. She repeats the word little girls quite often. Little is an interesting one. We usually associate something that is little with something fragile, something that needs to be protected, something kind of dainty and delicate. We recognize little as being more immature, like it has some growing up to do. Being little also is different than being small. Just listen to the way those words sound. Little, like it's a cute little word, and it has the soft D sound. I don't know, linguistically, I don't know what that is called, but the soft D sound of the double T in that word, the little instead of little, it kind of like sounds lilting, like a little sing-song, little. I'm having way too much fun alone in my house these days. But that kind of sing-song quality to it, right? It's got a cuteness to the word itself. It doesn't just mean cute. The pronunciation of the word itself is cute. So there's a cuteness there, a daintiness, a fragility, and kind of a femininity already. The word little is usually associated with more feminine things. Not always, but usually. And then you have the word girls, and she chose to talk about girls instead of boys here. Now, she starts the passage talking about children in general, girls and boys. And then she starts to zero in on how this seems to be more of an issue for little girls. Now, part of that is because she says that the amount of little girls that are working in factories has increased. But I think you guys noticed her argument is not necessarily about ending child labor for girls. It is about ending child labor in general, right? And she focuses on girls probably for the purpose of her audience, which are women in the suffragette movement. And that's very, very important to this essay. By the end of this, many of you recognize that there is actually an underlying argument here that is not about child labor, but actually might be her primary argument, and that child labor might serve as an example for her primary argument. By the end of this, she is saying to people, we can enlist the working man on behalf of our enfranchisement just in proportion as we strive with them to free the children. So enfranchisement is the right to vote, right? So what she is saying here is that we can't free our consciences because we are not allowed to participate in this republic the way that men can. And so we can appeal to men to please just think of the children. But as women, we kind of know, I mean, she hints at this, as women, we know that they won't because child labor is on the rise. And if men are the ones who can vote, then they seem to be perfectly fine with children working in factories. So as women, instead of directly fighting child labor, which we are not allowed to do because we can't participate in this republic, we have to fight for our enfranchisement, give women the right to vote. So it's like you must, if you were to kind of go backwards from that argument, you must give women the right to vote in order for them to stop child labor. But the primary part of that argument is women need the right to vote, right? You could also think of it in terms of a proposal. The problem is child labor. How do we fix the problem? Giving women the right to vote. Either way, the most important part of her argument then is the solution, which is voting rights, right? So if she is writing at this suffrage association and she is trying to get women even more fired up. That's what's hard about this, is that like it's not like she has to convince women that they need the right to vote. Many women were on board at this point with needing the right to vote, and especially this crowd. She's not preaching to the choir and being like, hey, have you ever thought about voting? Yeah, they've thought about voting. What she wants is to make them even more angry, even more frustrated, even more stymied, like feel like they want to feel like they are out of control. She is trying to bolster that feeling of being out of control. And so she's not necessarily saying like, you should feel guilty for child labor. She's more saying like, do everything you can, harness all of this anger and frustration to get the right to vote, because men should feel guilty for child labor. So in that case, it makes a whole lot of sense to focus on female children, little girls, because these little girls are working in textile mills, and in the system that exists, and what year is this? 1905. In the system that exists in 1905, these girls are going to grow up and be disenfranchised. Like, they are not going to enter a world where they can do anything about their own kind of like confinement in this system. And so you're going to make women who want the right to vote even more angry when they realize that these little girls are powerless in multiple ways, not just as laborers, as children, but then they are going to grow up to be mothers who, here it says mothers and teachers who cannot vote, but who are expected to work inside an economy. All right, so that I look there, that is just the term little girls that I am examining. Look at all the other visual details in that tiny paragraph. Tonight while we sleep, so we get an image of people sleeping, and it's a we. I want to say we might be focusing a little too much on pronouns in our rhetorical analysis. It's not always the most effective thing to write about, just because it's a little boring. It's obvious what she's doing with we. Think more about the sleeping as part of this imagery. So sleeping is an imagery, several thousand little girls, so not just the little girls, but the enormous quantity. You can think about textile mills. You can think about the night sky, what that looks like. Then she creates this kind of imagery. I think we'd still call it imagery even if it's audio, but the deafening noise. You can think about that as a bit of an exaggeration. I don't think these girls were necessarily going deaf, but it is deafening. You can think about the spindles, the looms, the weaving cotton and wools, silks and ribbons. She's not talking about girls making necessaries, right? She's not talking about them making socks necessarily. She's talking about them making silks and ribbons, which are like extravagant. Okay, so what I want you to do for this assignment is choose one of those images, not the little girl's image, but any of the others, and only choose one. That's really key for this. I want you to be able to write for a whole paragraph about one single image, like just the looms or just the wool and silk and ribbons, or sorry, no, ouch, just the silks and ribbons. Like, I'd be okay if you put those together. You could put cotton and wool together, whatever. I just want you to focus on a detail here, like we did with little girls. And then I want you to explain the rhetorical purpose of it. Why this imagery? Not just why imagery in general, which is to paint a picture or to create emotions or whatever, but why this imagery? Why is this image appropriate for this argument? Keep in mind, she could have chosen any image of child labor. She could have chosen little boys who are shoveling coal in the middle of the night, but she did not. She chose little girls in a textile mill. Why did she do that? And then I just want you to write a paragraph about that one specific image and post it to this assignment.